Hello everybody, welcome to Snyder's Inc. And today we got the newest Nick Crowley video. It is past midnight. I'm going to be tired by the time this goes out, but I said let's go get this video done and I'm going to do it. This is the darkest moments in TV history, part 6. We're going to get right into it. Ladies and gentlemen, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, comment what you think down below. Let's go.
Has really shaken up this Moncks Corner neighborhood. One resident said she was too worried about her children to come out and talk with us. And Sheriff MC Cannon says right now he can't offer much comfort.
It was March 3rd, 1989, in Berkeley County, South Carolina. 5-year-old Justin Turner leaves his home in the early morning, heading in the direction of his bus stop, where he was set to meet his neighbors. His stepmother, Megan Turner, who usually accompanied him, had been busy in the shower, while his father, Victor Turner, was off at work, leaving Justin to make this short walk alone. Later on, Megan would wait for the same bus to arrive at the end of the day, only when it did, Justin never got off. In fact, according to the bus driver and the neighbors, he never even made it on the bus in the first place. That night, Justin Turner was reported missing, and the search to find him was underway immediately. It was the third day of the search, March 5th, 1989, that yielded its biggest turnout, with volunteers from the community banding together with law enforcement to help find the young boy, with the group being accompanied by a camera crew from the local Channel 2 station, as everyone shared the same hope that the child would finally be found. And so they were off, with many searchers directing their focus on the nearby woods, while others, including Justin's own family, would search closer to the property as well as its neighboring land. This included rummaging around various sheds and piles of trash, as they were made to leave no stone unturned that day, with everyone geared up for a long, grueling day of searching. Though in the end, all they needed was a few minutes.
My son's in there.
Nathan, that's
No camera, no camera. Where is he at? Where is he at? In there.
With the cameras rolling, we see the moment that Victor Turner discovered his own son, stuffed inside an old cabinet in his own camper, with his reaction making one thing very apparent: Justin was no longer alive. The footage is devastating and made worse upon the discovery that not only was Justin dead, but he had been brutally assaulted and murdered by strangulation. But there was something even more unsettling about this footage: the fact that that very camper had already been searched in the days prior, and likely numerous times, yet somehow Justin's body was never found, meaning that whoever the killer was may have hidden him there days after the disappearance.
The latest.
It's his dad, isn't it? It's his dad. It's his dad. I know it's his dad. I know it's his dad. Because he's the only two people, that's the only two people we focused on, is his dad. I think it has to be.
Word about the boy's
Because finding it is one dark thing, but finding it and seeing his dad fake ass cry and pretend to be emotional when he's the one that did it would make it the darkest moment in TV history.
grim fate has really shaken up this Moncks Corner neighborhood.
They were clearly dealing with an incredibly dangerous and deranged individual, and tracking down whoever was responsible became law enforcement in the area's top priority. Though this certainly didn't mean that results were guaranteed, as there was a severe lack of physical evidence found on the scene, making it incredibly difficult to find any definitive information as to who might have done this. And despite their best efforts,
3, 2, 1, Happy New Year!
a full year passed,
It's 1991.
and then 2, and then 3.
Happy 2000.
Then a full decade passed, then 2, and then 3. From the start, Justin Turner's case was ice cold, and in the end, it seemed clear that it would remain this way forever. Until...
Breaking news this afternoon out of Berkeley County, as the Berkeley County Sheriff's Office has made 2 arrests in the Justin Turner case.
The Berkeley County Sheriff's Office confirms that yesterday they arrested Justin's father, Victor Lee Turner, and his stepmother, Megan Renee Turner, in the upstate, both charged with murder.
Oh, it's both of them. Okay, that makes way more sense.
35 long years after Justin Turner's body was discovered, it would be the very man who found him that was charged for his murder, along with his wife and Justin's stepmother. This supposedly came as a result of improved forensic technology, as well as other information that had previously been unreported, like one account where his stepmother Megan had been overheard talking about how she and Justin had gotten into a fight that very morning, with the woman eventually laughing about it and saying, "But I won that fight." From the very beginning, Megan was always considered a suspect in this case. In fact, she had even already been arrested for his death at one point in 1990, but was swiftly released on account of a lack of physical evidence. And this lack of physical evidence is still a factor to this day, as the recent arrest of this couple hinged mainly on circumstantial evidence, with one of the key pieces being that news footage. Investigators pointed out a number of strange moments in Victor's behaviors and actions that day when they went back and reviewed the recording, with the most glaring being that he had found his son literally seconds into the search, entering that camper and going right for the drawer that he was hidden in, almost as if he knew where to look. And given that he owned the property and he owned the camper, it makes more sense as to how Justin's body could have seemingly just appeared there, as he and his wife were the ones who had the easiest access to it. On top of this, upon finding Justin, Victor didn't rush in to check on his condition, and he seemed to just assume he was dead despite only getting a quick glance. He didn't rush to hold him, he didn't yell out to him, he just backed away and told those around him that he had found his son. Shortly after, it's alleged that Victor asked the detective on the scene what would happen if a family member had done this, with this question supposedly being posed before it was even revealed that Justin had been murdered. The sheriff on the case later proclaimed about the footage, "You look at it, you look at the actions, you look at the body language. I'll let the people draw their own conclusion."
I kind of assumed it was him. I didn't know the goddamn thing about the stepmom, so I couldn't say anything on that, but I assumed it was him.
On top of this, the same sheriff also recalled that right after the body was found, Victor and Megan basically refused to ever speak to detectives again, and they never once called in to check on the case for the entire 35 years. With the sheriff saying, "Nobody that I'm aware of from any of the family has ever heard from them again. I never got one phone call. Not one phone call from his daddy or his stepmother. What are y'all doing about my son's death? Not one. What does that tell you?" Watching the moments that Victor found his son's body, now knowing the context, disturbing doesn't even begin to describe it. And the fact that it took 35 years for this couple to finally be placed behind bars is baffling. But things were about to get a whole lot more shocking.
What? There's more?
During our hearing, we requested that the charges against Megan and Vic be dismissed. We were very fortunate today that we got a copy of the order from the judge dismissing the charges against both Megan and Vic.
As on June 7th, 2024, months after their arrest, Victor and Megan were released from prison and all charges against them were dropped, with the judge citing a lack of any new conclusive physical evidence, as well as the fact that nearly 20 people who were initially involved in the case, including witnesses and those who initially provided key testimony, had since perished, with the judge believing that it was now impossible to get the full story. On top of this, it was also discovered soon after the arrest, a notorious serial killer just so happened to be in the area on the day of Justin's murder. His name was Richard Ebenitz, and though it's unknown how many victims he truly has, it appears that at least 4 kidnappings and 3 slayings have been attributed to him, with some of these victims being taken in broad daylight when they were getting off the bus. Richard has long since passed away, and there's really no verifiable links to prove his involvement with this crime, with this potentially being just a strange coincidence, as it is worth noting that it seems like the rest of Justin's family still believe that Victor and Megan had killed him. But all of this left the case in a position that the judge felt was unsolvable, leaving the case without conclusion and without justice.
Okay, so this kid who has been murdered will never get justice due to a judge. He wouldn't even hear the case out. He wouldn't do anything. Now, fairness, it's hard to be like, look, he's guilty. Look at the body language in a video. But, like, god damn, this kid could never get justice for 30 years and will still never get justice. Oh, my God. Well, look, let's be honest. You're looking at the fall. That fall's going to perish in them soon anyway. So maybe it's best for them if they just fucking croak.
Meaning that in this footage, we may never truly know if Victor had just discovered his son or his victim.
The 3-day search is over, but not in a way anyone wanted to see.
Vivas que não recomendamos para crianças nem para pessoas sensíveis.
Recently I discovered something truly distressing. I was being double charged for Netflix. It turns out that I was
about to set up camp, George. George turned around and saw something scary. It was a thin trail of smoke.
There seems to be something innately interesting about survival shows. For decades, audiences have been enamored by depictions of people pushing themselves to the limit in order to survive harsh and almost inhumane conditions. Most notably, and one of the more tame examples, is Survivor, which no doubt popularized the genre, as it isn't just a staple of television in the US, but all the other countries that have since created their own versions of the show. In France, the show is called Koh Lanta, and was created back in 2001 by the company Adventureline Productions, or ALP for short. And by the year 2015, the show was one of the most popular in its market, having seen 13 successful seasons. And so, riding the high of this impressive feat, ALP decided to try their hand at a new show, one that was far more daring.
Hur fasen ska detta gå?
The show was called Dropped and would follow 2 teams of 4 contestants, who would be blindfolded and dropped into an undisclosed location each week via helicopter, with each team having the same mission: make it to civilization, charge a phone, and make a rescue call. And the first team to do so would win, while the losing party would have to vote one member off. It was a fairly interesting idea, but it also already had a proof of concept, as there was actually an identical show being made in Sweden at the time that was already well received. Though Dropped wanted to turn up the interest even more, and that's exactly what they did when they announced that the cast would be composed solely of famous athletes, most of whom turned out to be French Olympians who were already well beloved in the country. It had all the makings of a certain success, though in the end, this show would never actually make it to television, with the showrunners proclaiming that the program would not see the light of day. And this was all thanks to the events of March 9th, 2015. It was the start of their second episode. The first had seen the elimination of professional footballer Sylvain Wiltord, after his team failed to make it out of the wilderness first, which left 7 contestants, who were now ready for round 2. The day's shoot began in La Rioja, Argentina, with the cast being blindfolded in preparation to be loaded up into their helicopters and dropped at their next location. Olympic gold medal swimmer Alan Bernard was one of the first to step onto the craft, but was quickly told to exit, as his team had been the first to be dropped in the last episode, meaning that to make it fair, it was time for the other group to go first, thus giving them slightly more time. And so he stepped off the craft and waited with his group, as the other team instead loaded in. There were 2 helicopters on the scene. One was set to carry 3 contestants: Florence Attu, Semil Mouffet,
they come to the line and Mouffet touches and just gets there,
and Alexis Vastine, along with a crew member and 1 pilot. Meanwhile, the other craft was strictly for the crew, holding 4 production workers as well as a single pilot, with Alan Bernard and his group staying on the ground with their backs turned to the craft, as they eagerly anticipated the return of those helicopters to then take them. And so, with their blindfolds on in the pitch darkness, the team listened as they heard the sounds of the crew cheering on a successful takeoff, though the cheering would be cut short by an awful sound: the sound of crushing metal.
Such a bold.
The aftermath was recorded on the cell phone of someone standing nearby, showing us a large group of people rushing towards a massive plume of smoke. Where they would find the remains of one of the aircrafts, mangled and reduced to an unrecognizable mass of steel, with none of the contestants being able to make sense of what had just happened. It's very possible that the incident itself was captured by the production's own cameras. However, this footage has never and likely will never be released, though coincidentally, they weren't the only ones recording, as someone watching nearby just so happened to be filming the takeoff of these 2 crafts, showing us the reality of what had just transpired.
Oh, they collided.
Just as the two aircrafts had taken to the sky, the second and lowest helicopter began rapidly ascending, with the pilot seemingly failing to realize that the other craft was directly above them, causing the two to collide and then plummet to the ground below. In the end, 10 people went into the sky, and none made it down alive. The footage makes little sense even today. The weather was perfect, the crafts were some of the best in the world, and both of the pilots not only had 30+ years of flying experience, but they were both flight instructors themselves. Not to mention that the show's security coordinator, who was in charge of facilitating the takeoff, had actually worked on the Swedish version of the show and had ample experience in this exact situation. And yet, this is how it ended. It was eventually determined that the higher helicopter was likely flying out of visual contact from the lower helicopter, and that the pilot of the ascending chopper likely just didn't realize how close they were, with reports also indicating that he may have been distracted by the actual filming process, something we've tragically seen before.
We're gonna pull out. We don't know what has just happened right there.
And because of this, it appeared that at least some pilot error was to blame. But it was ALP that was found largely responsible, with alleged serious safety oversights being discovered later on, with it appearing that this crash was the result of multiple small factors coming together to form one catastrophic accident. After the incident, Dropped was swiftly cancelled, while the team that had so narrowly avoided getting on that flight and in turn likely having perished themselves were left in complete and utter shock, forever changed by the accident. With Alan Bernard, the man that's said to have been physically on that doomed craft for a split second, later recounting that there was a life before and after Dropped, because you don't come out of such an accident unscathed. In the end, AOP was indicted on manslaughter charges and found to be an inexcusable fault for the disaster, though it doesn't really seem like they faced any sort of actual legal punishment, with the company continuing their work on other programs to this day. But one thing that I was surprised to find in my research was that ALP is actually no stranger to the world of disturbing television moments. In fact, they had experienced one just a single year before this accident. As mentioned previously, ALP was already quite versed in the world of survival television, as they had run 13 successful seasons of Koh Lanta, though what I failed to mention is that the company had actually produced 14 seasons. Or at least they attempted to. It was season 13, during the very first day of filming, when contestant Jura Baban collapsed after the show's second challenge, with the show continuing to film as if nothing happened. Anonymous reports from the set claim that once on the ground, it took the medical team nearly 5 minutes before intervening, as to not interrupt their recording, and once they eventually did tend to him, he became more alert and complained of having severe cramps. But the show's primary doctor, Terry Costa, didn't believe that his ailments required an emergency airlift, as this would have cost the production company far too much money, especially on the first day of filming. Instead, Jura was diagnosed with dehydration and was brought back to their makeshift infirmary, where he would lay for nearly 2 full hours, until he was finally taken away by a proper medical team. On his way off the island, Jura Baban would pass away from cardiac arrest, at the age of just 25. Cardiac arrest that was completely missed by the show's doctors. The testimony from those on the scene painted ALP and Dr. Costa in an extremely negative light, as their inability to act quickly and recognize the ailments of Baban likely contributed to the young man losing his life, with some claiming that the doctor and the showrunners were far more interested in keeping the production running smoothly than actually caring for the young man. And though ALP denied any wrongdoing, the season would essentially be cancelled right there on the spot. But disturbingly, despite the filming lasting only 1 day, Baban's death wasn't the only tragedy to occur as a result. Due to intense public ridicule, Dr. Terry Costa would end his life just days later, stating that all the negative news reports about him were wrong and that they had sullied his good name, writing in a final note, "I'm sure that I treated Jura in a respectable manner, as a patient and not as a contestant," adding, "having to reconstruct this destroyed reputation would be unbearable," before ending his letter with a message to those on the shoot that had spoken out against him. The author of the anonymous comments about the circumstances of Jura Baban's death, and those who spread them, will have to face their conscience. In the end, Koh Lanta would return a year later and has been going strong ever since, as ALP did not appear to face any serious repercussions for.
It's insane how this company twice had people die under their watch and still have no repercussions. They just are left unscathed. Does these people just, the area that, I don't know where the hell this takes place, but is it just like, hey, we're not gonna bring much court bearing, we don't even want to much deal with it? Like, do they not like bringing places to court? They're just like, they'll suffer in their own way.
For the incidents that transpired under their watch, with their fault in both cases being debated to this day.
One's worse than the Colata one is way worse than the helicopter. The helicopter one they can argue, because it's just bad helicopters crashing into each other. We've seen it in real life before. This is one where you just literally left a guy, didn't really bother to check him, just went, yeah, we want to keep production going, so we'll bring you over here, and then 2 hours later, he's dead.
Emergência 911, a vida como ela é na tela do SBT.
It's July 5th, 1993, in downtown Sao Paulo, Brazil. A doorman working at a busy office building looks up to the sky and notices a woman sitting on top of the structure, her legs dangling 7 stories above the pavement below. One wrong move away from certain death. Precisely what she wanted. The man calls the police immediately, though surprisingly, they wouldn't be the first on the scene, and instead, they were beaten by a camera crew. The group was from the show Aqui Agora, a news program from the network SBT that had become notorious for their sensationalized and shocking stories. In their history, they had captured live footage of police riots, kidnappings, and even murders, which they would then broadcast on air as part of their show. And this unfolding situation was their content for the day.
Nós fomos ver o que estava acontecendo. E quando nós chegamos ao local, o corpo de bombeiros chegou, os bombeiros chegaram junto conosco. O que é um suicídio? Onde? Nós vimos junto. Quando o bombeiro olhou para cima, estava lá a menina, sentada no parapeito. E eu tomei um susto, a câmera olhou também, nós tomamos um susto.
Her name was Daniele Alves, and at the age of just 16, she had entered that office building and climbed up to its roof with the hopes of ending her life. And minutes after Aqui Agora arrived, she did just that, as their cameras captured it all.
É terrível. Daqui a pouco, Aqui Agora vai mostrar as imagens chocantes de uma jovem pulando para a morte. Atenção, são imagens exclusivas que não recomendamos para crianças nem para pessoas sensíveis.
Later that night, that footage would be packaged together into a roughly 10-minute segment, which the network promoted heavily throughout the day, hyping it up to be one of their most shocking episodes ever. And supposedly, it was. As though it appears that the full segment is currently lost, the footage of Daniele's fall was said to have been displayed almost entirely in full, showing the moments just before and just after she had landed.
That is so fucked up, but that is shock TV for you. They don't care at all, most shock TV things. They don't have no bearings. They have no morals or anything.
Where she was said to be still somewhat alive. It was more than shocking, and left viewers outraged that something of this nature could be shown on TV. But while showing the footage proved highly controversial enough, it was the context surrounding the footage that made it even more depraved. As mentioned previously, police were called to the scene to assist in efforts to help Daniele Alves, yet the first to arrive was that Aqui Agora news crew. And this wasn't a coincidence. They were all about capturing events as they unfolded, and in order to be the first on the scene, they actually tapped into the police scanners, monitoring all of the calls and information being passed through officers in order to get leads on potential stories, which is how they got word of this incident, hearing the calls and speeding over as quickly as possible. It wasn't illegal per se, but it surely wasn't ethical either. And this was only the start. After Daniele jumped, the crew that had filmed her had already captured their dramatic footage for the day, and as the officers and medical personnel dealt with the aftermath, the crew decided to turn their focus to the next element of their story: Daniele's parents. What? They packed up their equipment right away and headed straight for the home of Daniele's mother and father, with it being unclear how they even got that address in the first place. And there, they once again had beaten the police, who were still back at the scene trying to piece everything together. Though rather than waiting for them, the crew instead decided to take the lead, going up to the door, ringing the doorbell, and telling Daniele's parents that their daughter had just passed away. The crew then supposedly took the parents to the police station, consoling them all while their cameras kept rolling, as the crying parents made for the perfect footage for their segment. Exploitative is the only word for it, but what they did next, well, that was something far more evil. Having dropped the parents off at the police station, the crew then got to work creating their segment for the night, and as part of it, they needed to find a reason as to why Daniele did this. They first theorized that this was likely due to a drug addiction, which had somehow...
Wait, so you... So they made up the reason? Sorry about that. They made up the they just came up with a reason? They didn't even just hey, this girl jumped off a thing, we don't know why. We had to hear her parents crying. They're just like, oh no, we need a story. We need to make this girl the most screwed up individual and make her be like, look how fucked up this woman is. Wow, these people are pieces of shit. I hate them so much.
Spiraled and led to her jumping, but then they decided that that just wasn't dramatic enough, and they instead shifted to a different story, one that they reported to all of their viewers as if it were a fact. They reported that Daniele Alves had ended her own life because of her abusive parents, placing the entire blame on the family that they had just supposedly helped.
What the?
And there was one massive issue with this. It wasn't even true. The claim appears to have been quite literally based on nothing. It has no verifiable backing and seems to have been a complete guess. In fact, just days later, Daniele's best friend spoke out and said that Daniele had done this because of a broken heart, not because of drugs or any sort of abuse. It's sickening, as the crew cared so little about Daniele's own story that they seemingly just made up their own. And imagine for a moment being those parents, going about your day when a TV crew comes to your house and tells you that your daughter is dead. And despite consoling you, those same people then broadcast your daughter's death for the whole world to see, and blame you for it.
They are so fucked up. What the fuck is wrong with TV? That's it. Oh! These people make me so angry.
Naturally, this didn't go without repercussions for Aki Agura, who had crossed the line in the most soulless way possible. And the effects were swift and powerful, as the rating soared 33%, making it more popular than ever before. The network would end up being sued by Daniele's family, who was eventually awarded $1 million as a result, but realistically, no amount of money could ever be enough, as the show's actions permanently affected that family and destroyed their grieving process in a way that I can't even wrap my mind around. But this did little to slow down Aki Agura, as they remained on the air for 4 more long years, during which they leaned even more into these unfolding crime stories, leading to them witnessing numerous other deaths, and even being taken hostage themselves on multiple occasions. And the more I researched this topic, the more insane the segments I found became, with by far the worst being an old episode where they recorded a man who was threatening to jump off a bridge. It was a very similar situation to Daniele, though this time the crew was much closer, so close in fact, that the host actually moved in and started interviewing the man as he was hanging there. All the while they kept cutting back and forth to another camera angle below the bridge, ready to capture his fall at any moment. Now thankfully this person was pulled to safety, but even as he was being taken away, the presenter still kept trying to interview him.
I'm surprised the fucking, knowing the way the fucking, these people are, I'm surprised they didn't fucking push him off. It was just like, oh, I'm sorry, he fell, he jumped. The guy attacked me and I fucking had to defend myself, but it's his fault.
In one of the most surreal scenes that I've ever seen in my life, with this situation perfectly encapsulating this show, Aki Agura would continue on air until the year 1997, when one day the show was pulled due to its declining ratings, and in its place, the network would instead begin airing The Disney Club.
You look down the track and there is a train coming toward you. What do you think would happen?
It was an exciting day for the crew of the upcoming movie Midnight Rider, the Gregg Allman story. Years had been spent planning and scripting for this biographical film about Gregg Allman of the Allman Brothers.
I already know what this one is. I know what this story is. This is the one that didn't train, right? They were on the train tracks. They weren't allowed to be. And so the train came and it hit the bed. And one of the parts of the bed went flying and hit the one girl in the head and killed her. I'm pretty sure she's the only one that killed. That dies. I'm pretty sure that's right. I know the story already, so this one I'll just let go.
As well as getting acquainted to their equipment and new co-workers. But for the group of 20, the excitement in the air was palpable, as they were given access to a stunning piece of land in Nahunta, Georgia. So stunning, in fact, that the film's director, Randall Miller, just couldn't wait to begin the actual process of filming. Slicing through the property was an old railroad that had crossed over a scenic bridge raised high above the Altamaha River, the perfect location for a shot that Miller had been envisioning. It was set to be a dream sequence where Allman's character would wake up on a hospital bed in the middle of the tracks and see a vision of his brother, and it was a shot that Miller just had to have. However, there was one major issue. The crew was given permission to film on the property, but not the actual railway, as this was owned by a separate company named CSX, and when Miller asked them for permission to film the shot, he was denied multiple times, as these tracks were still very active, making it far too dangerous. But being on location and seeing that bridge, Miller couldn't help himself. And so he directed his crew to set up the scene anyway, believing that they could quickly steal a shot without anyone noticing. Miller had supposedly done his research too, and discovered that only 2 trains were set to roll through the area that day, and he knew the general intervals in which they were supposed to pass. Based on this, he figured that those trains wouldn't arrive for a few hours, giving them more than enough time to film the movie's very first scene. And so they quickly set everything up, rolling out a metal hospital bed and placing it towards the center of the bridge, with Miller assuring his crew that this was in fact safe, and that they had nothing to worry about, as the camera began to roll. Minutes later, the bed began to shake, and the silence around them was shattered by the sound of a whistle. Before them was an unexpected 3rd train, heading straight for the bridge that the entire crew was now on. Miller had gotten the schedule wrong. At this point, the crew was filming a considerable distance into the bridge, but the shortest and really only route to safety was to go towards the oncoming train, and so that's precisely the route they took. And as they did so, there was little panic within the group, as rather than rushing to safety, they all seemed more focused on retrieving their equipment, believing that they had more than enough time to salvage everything. As after all,
this is what makes them stupid, okay? This is what... They're just like... If I see an oncoming train, my first I'm like, got a good amount of time, let's grab our shit and go. Like, no, I'm like, get the fucking lead this shit, we're going.
Using this expensive equipment on day 1 would have been devastating for the production. They likely had no idea that from the sound of that first whistle, they had just 60 seconds until the train would cross that bridge, whether they were off it or not. As they began to realize just how quickly the train was approaching, their movements became more hurried, which is where one major problem occurred. That metal hospital bed. It was incredibly heavy on its own, and though it was designed to roll, its wheels kept getting caught on the tracks, and worst of all, it was set up horizontally, which essentially turned it into a barricade. And despite their best efforts to save everything, their time was up, and as the camera continued rolling, the train would arrive. At this moment, the train itself also had a camera rolling, which showed that even in those final moments, the crew was still trying to salvage their equipment. What happened next was a blur. Some were able to leap to safety, while others managed to jump to the side and cling onto the bridge. But there was still one thing that remained in the train's path. That hospital bed, which upon impact was torn to pieces. Pieces that were flung all over the area, striking multiple crew members and leaving many injured. But it was 27-year-old filming assistant Sarah Jones who was struck by the largest fragment, with a force so strong that it caused her to fall directly in front of the train. In total, 7 crew members were hurt but alive, while Sarah Jones had tragically been killed. On the very first day of production, in the very first shot, the unthinkable had happened. And when it came to passing the blame, most turned their attention to Randall Miller, as he was the one who ordered the scene to be shot despite being denied permission numerous times. And this public disdain towards him only grew as he and his production company denied any responsibility, and instead, they blamed the railway company. Just 1 week after the incident.
How do you blame the Look, it's their fault, okay? They told us we couldn't do it, and it's their fault for not thinking that we would follow their rules, right? When they told us they shouldn't, they should have known and stopped all trains because they should have known we were going to break their rules and do it against their will. So it's really their fault if you think about it. I mean, I can't believe they just allowed trains to go on train tracks and not stop everything for our production. I mean, it's really their fault when you think about it. I'm just a helpless little fucking guy sitting there who's trying to lead Gaza scene. It's all their fault.
Randall Miller requested a new permit to begin filming Knight Rider once again, asking if they can begin as soon as possible. This, however, would never actually happen.
Good!
As he was instead arrested and given a 1-year prison sentence for manslaughter, as well as a 10-year ban from directing any films, a mandate that he would actually go on to break, though he was swiftly forgiven, and today he continues to direct. But while it's easy to focus on the morbid nature of this case and the man responsible for it, there was one unexpected outcome of this horrific accident. Upon her passing, Sarah Jones' parents set up a foundation called Safety for Sarah, which pushed for safer working conditions on film sets, with the movement bringing to light a number of safety concerns that were often brushed aside and ignored. And all in all, their efforts have made TV and film sets significantly safer, giving their daughter a purpose even after her death. On top of this, Sarah Jones was also honored by countless production companies across the world, as crews began writing her name on their film slates, with there ultimately being over 2,000 of these tributes for her, from some of the world's most well-known productions. But by far the biggest tribute was when she was honored at that year's Academy Awards ceremony, a stage that she always dreamed of making it to.
When you saw her name up on the screen at the Academy Awards, what were your feelings?
Overwhelming.
She made it to the Academy. She made it.
I wanted to give one last quick shout out to Rocket Money. It's the start of a brand new year, and if being better with your...
Ladies and gentlemen, that is it for this reaction video. Let me know what you think in the comments. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all for the next one.